Hello and welcome to SIRCC Online's Meet the Authors 2021. The theme of this year's online conference is Workforce, and we have a special edition of the Scottish Journal for Residential Childcare, with this theme being released today. We are delighted to be holding a series of conversations with some of the authors who have contributed to this special edition and hear a bit more about their writing and get to know the people behind the papers. I am joined here by Paul Gilroy and Laurence Wareing, authors of The Other Side of the Wall. Paul, Laurence, hello.
Hi. Hi, how are you doing?
So we're going to jump into our first question. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and your connection with residential childcare?
Yeah, I'm Paul Gilroy. I'm head of service in the soon to be brackets retired head of service for Crossreach Residential Care and Education Services. And I've got 34, 35 years experience in residential childcare in various different roles, and really enjoyed my time working in residential care. It's a very rewarding place to be. So that's me.
And yeah, I'm Laurence Wareing. I'm a freelance writer. But I've been working with third sector organisations for quite a lot of my time. Older people in care, actually, for a while, and then more recently with a couple of residential childcare organisations. So for me, it's been about getting to understand the sector and trying to share some of its stories.
Thank you. The title of your article, The Other Side of the Wall, instantly caught my attention. Can you tell us what the article is about and why you picked it?
I'm really glad that the title caught your attention. That's great. We wanted to tell the story of the transition that Crossreach had made in its work residential childcare, and particularly the transition from the large kind of setting of Ballykinrain to smaller living in a community houses in local settings. We wanted to tell that story, and really very particularly to underline the fact that this was an evolution, that the kind of the ethos and the values that had informed the work in Ballykinrain for years were the same values. It was the same value base, same ethos, which meant that the sort of transition to the new settings had happened, and in doing that, we were listening to the stories of some of the former pupils who had been part of that transition, and had kind of also informed why that transition had happened. So that was what we sort of set out to do, and the title actually came from one of the young former pupils, and he said one day, because Ballykinrain is a big house on a big estate with walls, and he talked about, it would take 200 yards before you got from the house to the gate. And he was talking about the sort of that distance that you go to get to the gate. And then when he moved to a local setting, 200 yards would take him to the bus stop and take him into the community. And it was a very different kind of 200 yards, if you like, and one was beyond the wall. It was about making that connection with local community. So in a way, it's kind of a metaphor, but it was a very literal thing for him. And we wanted to reflect that kind of the difference between what it was like living in Ballykinrain Castle and living in a local community. So that's sort of that kind of what Claymore said became a thread for us, and really needed to be there in the title.
Laurence, thank you. That is a very powerful story to go with a very powerful title for an article. So I'll move on to my next question. What was your motivation for writing this article and the key messages that you wanted to share?
I think in lots of ways, Laurence has kind of touched on some of the motivations, but when he was talking about the title there and the story, but it kind of really started from a little bit of, we were making a big change at Crossreach, and it's not just Ballyconrain, because we had Gilesland as well, and we made a big decision now 7.5, 8 years ago now, where we decided that we already were on a journey of change, moving from the big campus into houses in the community, but we made a conscious decision to change the structure of that residential care and education service that Crossreach was known for at Ballyconrain and Gilesland. And this was the end of the journey in that sense, because it took us a wee bit longer to get there than we anticipated, but we had previously closed down the Gilesland campus and moved into houses. And we were in this process now, and this is us at the end. We've got a new school in Erskine, and we've got a number of houses in different communities. So there was a little bit about letting people know we were still around, we were still who we were. And as Laurence talked about, the ethos and the values hasn't changed. But equally, there was that wee bit about also trying to tell the story of some of our experiences, and we touched on it a little bit in an article about maybe some of the responses we got from some communities when we were looking for houses in the communities. Some of that negative response that we got, where people had that stigma and about children in care and children and young people in care. But also we had really good responses from communities as well, and some of the more recent houses where local community neighbours were coming round and saying nice to see you and bringing in bacon and all the rest of it, so you had a real change of that. But we wanted to kind of tell that story of the transition of the service, but also what it means for children and young people and transitions for them. And there is hope. When we started, that some people said that was a big brave thing to do and we don't think you'll do it, but we wanted to say we've managed it. And we've evolved as a service, but we haven't lost what was always at the heart and the core of it, and that's about children and young people and doing the best for them and giving them the best start in life as much as we can, and the best hope. So I think it's a wee bit about a story of hope as much as anything else. But it started from letting people know, we need to let people know we've changed and we're different, but we're still the same at the same time,
And I think also, wasn't there that sense that we wanted to tell that story, and at the same time we were talking with some of the former pupils of Ballyconrain and realised that what they had to say was absolutely central to that story, and how we told it, and we wanted to share their voices. Give them voice, and also members of staff as well. We will talk about the young people, but it was very much about kind of the experience of the workforce as well. And so how do you kind of tell your story and get through the voices of the people who've actually been part of it? So I think that was an important element as well.
Yeah, I just pick it up on that quickly, Laurence. One of the things we did about that was also we've started some new Facebook pages, group pages, because we recognised about the connection and feeling that people have for the building and the place, because it's around for a long time, and we didn't want to lose any of that as well. And that's been a positive thing as well, because it's helped us through this. It's helped us reconnect in a way that we might not have done with some former young people and residents with us and some former staff. So there was lots of really good things that have come out of it.
Yeah,
that's some strong motivation, and the voice of young people and your workforce runs really clearly. We can read direct quotes from young people in your article. I was wondering, what was the workforce response to moving from the residential campus out into the community?
I think initially there was a kind of mixture of kind of apprehension, a bit of excitement, looking forward to it, a bit of apprehension. We had, in many respects, Sarah tested the water a little bit, both from Ballykinrain and the Gilroy campuses, in which we'd already opened some houses, but had kept the campus going. So there was a little bit where people could see what was happening. When we made the decision that we were going to move completely from the campuses, that kind of took it to a different level, because we're all the same. We like to, when things are a wee bit different for us, we like to have that safety net of what we know. And we all knew what it's like to live and work and be part of a residential school campus. So we were asking people to essentially do the same job and to do the same level of support and for children and young people, but in a slightly different way, and taking them a little bit out of their comfort zone. So some people, yeah, it was definitely a lot of excitement and apprehension, but also apprehension in there. But what I've got to say, I think I have to say that all of the staff team have embraced the change with enthusiasm, and what they say now is that living in a house in a community, you know, is just so much better. They can see that relationships are on a different level. The relationship to have with children and young people is different. They always had good relationships, but somehow it's a bit different. There's what I was saying there earlier about the connection with neighbours, you know, neighbours coming in and bringing in bacon or whatever and that kind of stuff. Young people, the kids being able to go out and play with their pals in the street and go down and into the village or just down the road, and all of that, it's all changed. The whole dynamic has changed in it. We always said part of our role was about giving children and young people back their childhood. And you can only do that to a certain extent in a big residential campus. And I think in the article, Claymore makes reference to that. And just being part of a community totally changes that dynamic. So, as I say, yeah, a bit apprehensive at first, but people have embraced it. And I think what they're now experiencing is a much more fulfilling experience than they had previously on a big residential campus.
Can I just chip in there, Sarah? Sorry, but one of the things that caught my attention when Claymore was talking was he said, I could bring my school friends back now. He didn't feel he could do that when he was in Ballykinrain, but the local house, yeah, the mates can come back. So that's a huge difference, isn't it?
Absolutely. You talked about relationships and how important they are. And one of the quotes in the article that stood out was a former pupil writing about the seeds of love planted at Ballykinrain.
Mm-hmm.
Talked about that in terms of a relational model. Could you tell me a wee bit more about that?
Yeah, and that was said by a guy called Darren, and he had a rough ride after he left Ballykinrain. He had a hard time for the next 10, 15 years, and yet his experience at Ballykinrain had taken root. Literally, and sort of after that sort of period of difficult time and being in and out of prison as well, he began to kind of pull himself together, and he would say that it was those seeds of love at Ballykinrain that kind of helped him do that. And I think one of the things we were exploring was how does that happen? How do you plant those seeds of love? It's interesting language that he uses, and we talked a little bit about some of the work staff at Ballykinrain did with a guy called Dan Hughes, who talked about how you make connection with young people. He talks about play, he talks about empathy, and I think one of the things I realized, sort of coming, as it were, on the outside, is how hard that is to do. What a gift that is if you can be there for young people in a way that really impacts them. I just recently there was a YouTube clip popping up every now and then, which is sort of an interview with the actor Bill Murray a little while back, and it's part of a longer interview, I think. But he's asked, what is it? What's the one thing you really want And he kind of goes off on a very long Bill Murray train of thought. But at the beginning, he says, what I want is to really be there for people, which is really present, which I think, and he said, you know, I don't want people to be talking to me and thinking, oh, he's changing channel in his mind and body, that he's there for me right now. And I think when I talk with Paul and have heard about other members of staff in Ballykinrain and elsewhere and how they operate, and Craig, who we'll talk about, that gift of being absolutely present for a young person when, you know, every minute of the day you're kind of risk assessing where, you know, what's going on around you. You may be pulled to other children who suddenly have a kind of an immediate need, and it's really difficult to be there for the one child that you're kind of key worker for or looking after, but to see that happen, because children know, don't they? You know, they'll either if they know you're not quite there for you, they'll kick off, or they will feel demoralized. And you don't know which way it's going to go, but they do understand if you are their priority. And it's just, as I say, from the outside, I just think that's just a remarkable gift that staff can offer young people, and I do not underestimate how difficult that is. So I you know, does that, but that's what it is, you know, that's what plants the seeds of love, I think, in the end. So that's kind of one of the things I have learned, I guess, from talking to Paul and his colleagues at Ballykinrain.
Thank you so much, Laurence. It's lovely to hear about the stories behind the quotes and behind the words. It strikes me when I was reading your article that there are challenges as well in terms of the process. And you talk quite a bit about othering that care experienced young people can experience. Could you tell me a wee bit about that and what role the workforce might play in this process?
Yeah, and I touched on a wee bit earlier on. I was saying about the motivation for writing the article, and the othering's a kind of terminology and a concept that lots of us are familiar with within the care sector, and just in that sense of looking at another group of people and saying it's no me, it's them, you know, type of thing. I think the very nature sometimes of residential care and the care system kind of places young people, it's an unintentional consequence maybe of just the way the care system has been over the years. And it was really quite noticeable when, in some of the times when we were going looking for houses and trying to find houses to get into the communities, in terms of the response, because we tended to, most of the time we would be looking to rent a house, and we would do a little bit of homework and research about the area, and we would try and make contact. Crossreach is part of the wider Church of Scotland, so we would make contact through our parish connections and local community councils, and if you like, kind of test the water, and it was remarkable sometimes how much othering, inverted commas, there was going on for care, you know, and people's perceptions of what it meant to be care experienced. So often we would get that experience, that response of expectations that they were going to come with trouble. You know, they were going to cause disruption. The police would be involved all the time, and it would be they would be a risk and a danger to other children and young people in the community, etc. And we had to spend a lot of time explaining that that's not the case with children and young people in care. Yeah, they come with challenges, and there's experiences that none of us would like to have, and our role and job as individuals and as a service in society is to wrap our arms around them and look after them and make life safe for them so that they can thrive and grow and develop as, into the human beings and the potential that they've all got. And it was really, that kind of struck me really about, and what we always try to do is find somebody in the local community who had a different viewpoint. You always try to find your local heroes who just would go, I mean, man, it's not always like that. And would challenge back as well. So, but I think there's also what became apparent for me is, I think subconsciously, we in the, and I say we in the care sector, I'm talking about us as adults and professionals care sector, can unintentionally actually be part of that othering. And it's not what we've intended to do, but just thinking about some of our own process and procedures that we need to do. And for example, kind of, as a big organisation, we get auditors coming in. So we're always asked about having receipts for all the money that we spend, and it's just that kind of thing. Laurence talked about risk assessments earlier and made reference to risk assessments. You're always getting things about, have you done a risk assessment for taking so many kids out in the car, etc. You wouldn't do that in your house and your family. Let's be honest about it. Type of thing. You just wouldn't. And I can think back to other times, in a previous part of my life in the care sector, I was a PE teacher. You would go swimming, and you're not allowed to let the kids dive into the swimming pool anymore in a metre off, higher, etc. And you're thinking, but the kids, they want to enjoy themselves, they want to go up and jump off the diving board and etc. and all the rest of it. And they're watching all these other young people and children doing that, and we're trying to say, we're not allowed to do that, son. And so inadvertently, I think we could also be part of that othering process, although we're not meaning to do it. So I think from the part of this bit for me is about us as a workforce actually starting to think about actually, when are we also doing that? And what can we do differently to kind of, because on one hand, we're saying to the wider community and society and population, children in care are just children and young people, full stop. And they need our care and our love and support. While at the same time, we're also bound by these policy and procedures and regulations and rules that we put in place that in themselves stigmatise the children we look after, even though we're trying not to. And I think that really that was part of the whole concept of othering. It made me kind of think there's a way of doing this differently, and the whole move away from the residential campus into any houses in the community, I think, is shifting that a little bit as well. Hopefully it's shifting that a bit. I don't know if that kind of answers, but that's the kind of thought it was going through our heads when we were talking about and thinking about that othering and that stigma of children and young people, and trying to understand what is that like for them, what does that feel like for them,
Thanks very much. Well, lots of food for thought there, and I suppose a couple of questions for listeners to maybe take away and reflect on in a few quiet moments. You talked there about if it was in a family, would you risk assess? And I suppose thinking about family, there was a really lovely quote from a former pupil. I'll just read it out. It says, "It never felt like staff, more like family, with father figures, mother figures, uncles, aunts, the type of structure a kid needs in any situation that was given wholeheartedly." What a quote to have included and to be provided with, and to then include in your article. You talk in the article about building relationships that last beyond the time a child lives within a setting. And I think this quote speaks to that a bit. Can you tell us a bit more about the key messages around about that?
Yeah, that was that was from one of our guys who joined the Facebook group page. So we hadn't had contact with him for quite some time, and that was the first thing he put up when he joined the group. And I think it puts a lump in your throat, because this young person was with his probably about almost 20 years ago now. And he's got that sense. So I think for me, there's what's a key message that's coming out of that is for all of us who work in residential childcare is that often we will not see the impact that we have because we look after children and young people for maybe 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, sometimes longer than that. And I think back to 20 years ago, the best part of 20 years ago when that young person was with us, and how Ballyconrain was then, how the sector operated then in terms of 2, 3 year placements, move on, etc. We weren't necessarily encouraged to keep in touch with for pupils as they moved on, maybe for a little bit of time. But it wasn't really the kind of done thing to do. It was kind of, you're not supposed to, and there was always a bit of kind of uncertainty around all that kind of stuff. And many people have kept in touch, don't get me wrong, but there's also many times where people might feel uncomfortable around that because it might be, as I say, it wasn't encouraged. And I would often say to my colleagues in all the years I've been a kind of leadership management role that we will never fully understand the impact we have. Because sometimes even as ourselves as adults, when you think back to yourself as a child, how you understood the world as a 10-year-old or a 15-year-old is different from how you understand it's a 25 or a 30 or a 40-year-old. And we kind of do the job that we do and the role that we do, knowing that we're not necessarily always going to see the real impact and the real outcome. We'll see short-term outcomes where, young people are gaining qualifications at school and moving on to college or university or going to work and job and maybe returning home to live with a family or start their own family, etc. And you might see that in the short term, but you never really see the long term unless that individual is willing to come back and share that with you in some way. And I think that quote kind of sums that up, because even although you might not know what that impact is and you might not see it, it doesn't mean that we still shouldn't do what we do. And it doesn't mean we still shouldn't do what we do with understanding that relationships are something that's there to last, and they're there to last a lifetime. And I think that quote kind of tells it that way, because it describes how I wanted to be as a worker. And it describes how I would want all of my colleagues to be as workers, whether it's within Ballyconrain, previous in Ballyconrain, within Crossreach, or just the wider sector. I think that's how we want to be. We want people to see us that way. We want children and young people to feel that way. Maybe not feel that way about every single one of us, but they need to have some adults in their life that they feel that way about. But at the time, they might not be able to articulate that and tell that to us, because they might not quite fully kind of understand that. So to see that quote coming back from a young man who's probably in his early 30s now, to say that that's what it felt for him at that time, and to tell us that and to share that with us is really rewarding. And I think the key message I would want to say to everybody from that, if you're in your start of your journey in residential childcare, that's what it means. That is what you do. Right? And what you're doing is you're giving people hope. So even in the darkest times when it's really, really difficult, and it's been a difficult evening or weekend or whatever, there's always hope. And you need to stick with it, and relationships are key. And if you do that from a genuine point of view, in a genuine perspective, then that's what you're going to give. You give it yourself and you get something back. You might not see it, but it gets paid back to you. So 20 years later, I had a wee lump in my throat when I read that, and I remembered who the young person was, and I thought, well, that's what I wanted you to feel like, but I never knew that at the time, if that's what you really felt like. So the key message is, there's always key message for children and young people is there is hope. There is always hope. Key message for staff is do what's right, and it is rewarding, and you will get that kind of sense when you see that kind of quote. I don't know, not much more I can say about that other than it's the key message is hope.
perfect, Paul. Thank you very much. You talked a lot there about relationships, and I think you said they don't need to like all the staff that are working with them, but if they can have one key person, at least one key person. We read about the journey of Claymore and Craig, and it sounds like they found their key people, each other. How did their journey influence the way that you wrote the article?
Certainly from my point of view, I think their journey was a way of really articulating the best of what we want to be. And it was explaining not just the bit there I was saying before about relationships and about that hope and about, you know, what you want young people to experience and feel, but also that bit about our transition and change, about why was it better to be in a house, in a smaller house, in a smaller environment, in a community, rather than a big residential campus out in the middle of the country, which is, in the case of Ballycrane, it's a castle, you know. And people sometimes said, oh, it's a bit like Hogwarts and Harry Potter when kids were driving up, but it's also scary. It's also a big scary place. And there's not many people who go and live in a castle, you know. And it coming, being in care and not living with your family and living with people who are, and essentially who, when they come into care and come to somewhere like the other services in Crossreach, young people are coming to strangers. And if you're coming to live with strangers in a big castle in the middle of the country, and it's dark and it's cold in the middle of the winter, it can be a really scary place. So we've got to do things that are trying to reduce that worry, concern, anxiety a young person might have or a child might have. Remembering that some of our guys would come to us when we were 7, 8 years age, really young. And I think Claymore story and the Claymore and Craig's story, because it is both of their stories, definitely. And they were together at Ballycrane and they moved from Ballycrane to Mulmuir Farm together. And how that relationship evolved, just encapsulated about what's so much right about having a relational attachment approach, but also it also highlighted about so much more that can be achieved by everybody by not being in a big institution and actually being in a situation where it's just a house. It's just a house, and it's just a house and a home in the community, amongst other families and houses and homes in the community. So I think that was, that influenced the tone. I think for me, it kind of definitely influenced the tone of how we wrote the article.
And I think what you say, Paul, about the fact that they made that move together is really important. That it wasn't just Claymore who went the other side of the wall. Craig went the other side of the wall with him, and it kind of helped them both build an even stronger relationship as a result, and one that has been able to continue now that Claymore's, you know, a man out there working, doing his own thing, and he still has that relationship with Craig. So that was really significant. And also, you know, the way Craig talked about that relationship, the way he offered this kind of idea of, he used to say to Claymore, well, look, you know, we're kind of like a rally driving team here, and you're the driver, Claymore. I'm the co-driver. I'll help navigate. Doesn't mean, you know, doesn't mean that we won't always get lost. We may crash, but we will then stop and regroup and then carry on together. And that was quite a powerful way of talking about being an adult working with a young person, because what you're saying is, I can't control every bit of this journey. You've got to do this to a degree on your own, but I will be there alongside you. And we realize that that kind of idea of being alongside, but allowing the young person to kind of find their own way, is a sort of is what you would hope for the whole sector in a way. You know, what legislators do, what local authorities do. In the end, it's about being alongside the young people and hearing what they have to say, but supporting them in their journey. So it's a kind of it's a really interesting image, which again, that did influence, I think, certainly for me, the way we kind of put the whole story together. I think for me, it's kind of probably the central part of what we wanted to say.
That's great, Laurence, thank you. You mentioned there what you would hope for children and young people. What are your hopes for the staff and young people of Wareing and Crossreach Residential Care and Education Services as they move into the next chapter of their story?
I had touched on it before, and the hope is that it is that word hope, that have faith and have hope, that things can be different, that life is not inevitable, that we often hear of stories and situations and events and really sad and tragic situations and events of young people who have been in the care system, but it doesn't need to be like that. And I think what my wishes are and what my hopes are for the staff is that they get a strength and a belief in what they're doing, is they're doing the right thing, and that they can be that inspiration and give children and young people confidence, and that those children and young people can aspire to go on to do different things. You know, you look at Claymore, look at lots of the other guys who have been back in touch with us through the Facebook page, and just talking the online to one of them recently, who was telling me he's now working for another care provider as a care worker. You know, and I don't think he ever that he would ever have thought that would have happened when he was with us as a pupil 15, 16 years ago or so, whenever it was. And it's not inevitable that because you are a young person in the care system that you will, and particularly when you come to residential school, part of the care system, which can mean that you've often had quite a difficult journey in life before that happens. It doesn't mean that it's inevitable, that it's there are chances here for you, but you need people to believe in you. And I would like to think that what the staff in Crossreach Residential Care Education Services get from the journey we've been on, the change that we've been on, they are already experiencing, I know lots of them are already experiencing what Craig experienced and Claymore experienced in moving to the houses, you know, in terms of that aspiration, having staff who believe in you, having adults who believe in you, and children, young people having ambition and to be the best they can be. And I think, yeah, that would be my wish, is that this bit is yeah, just that, you know, have that hope and have that faith that life is not inevitable. You go out and it does take risks. It's not always going to be hunky-dory and straightforward, but you get up and you dust yourself down, and if you've got the right adult round about you and the right adults round about you, whether it's mum and dad or whether it's your key worker, but you've got somebody who believes in you, then it gives you the strength to carry on to the next bit.
Thank you for that, Paul. I think we'll all be watching, interested to see what happens in the next stage of the journey. Your article is published today in the Scottish Journal for Residential Childcare, free to access, to download or view for any of our readers or listeners. Do you have any advice that you could give for somebody who might be thinking about submitting an article to the Scottish Journal for Residential Childcare?
So from my point of view, I would say get yourself a writer that helps you, right? Definitely. On a serious point, and Laurence will have a view on this as well, but no, certainly, first of all, I would say, I think if you've got a really powerful story to say, it needs to be said. So yeah, I would certainly encourage people to be thinking about it. But also, yeah, I think it's good to do it with somebody else as well. And certainly from my point of view, don't be scared off by it. Sarah and others in the team there are really helpful, and they give you good guidance about where you want to go to and how it wants to be pitched and the rest of it, because it can be a bit scary thinking, I don't know if I can write that, and it's an academic thing, and it's University of Strathclyde, and it's going to go out there, and other people will see it, and I don't know if I can do that, and I don't. But yeah, be confident, and if you've got a story to tell the story, because I think that's it. It's only by telling our stories and sharing our experiences that we will make the system better.
And I think, seriously, I think it does help doing that with someone else, because you can, you've got someone to bounce your ideas with, and someone else who will ask you questions and probe a little bit. Because I think, and I think it's the same for a lot of us in whatever area of work we're in. Very often we kind of take what we do for granted, and it's a little bit, it takes a bit of work just to kind of articulate it, and it helps if someone else is asking you the questions to do it. So that, I talk with Paul and just kind of every conversation become more aware of the kind of expertise that he has built up over the years. And by having these conversations, more of that expertise comes through, and more of the stories come through, and then you can start building the parts of a jigsaw, which then become the article. And yeah, Paul's absolutely right. The staff at the journal as well, give you the feedback and the guidance that is incredibly helpful. So it's really rewarding to do and enjoyable.
Yeah, I would come in and say that it has been really rewarding to do, and well, all joking aside, that getting Laurence to help us out was fantastic, because I think certainly for myself, and probably I think maybe for other colleagues in the sector, we're used to writing professional stuff. We're used to writing things about tender documents for frameworks and the rest of it, and it's a different way of writing. And yeah, so that was one of that would be that. So I would echo what Laurence is saying about having that somebody to bounce that ideas off of, and somebody to tease your thoughts out, and be able to articulate it in a way in which you want to tell, which is a natural story, because this is about people. It's always about people. But unfortunately, some of us are in roles where we have to write things in very professional language, which is not really particularly person-centred. So there is a skill to that, and I'm grateful for Laurence for his help in doing that.
Thank you very much. And absolutely, we've got a lot of advice and guidance on the website, on the CELCIS website, under the heading journal. There's lots of guidance and articles there. 2021, in the current context, I can't have a conversation about residential childcare without asking you about the promise. So for your final question, can I ask, what are your views on the roles of the promise, and what do you think will change or needs to change for residential childcare?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Sarah. I think the first thing I'd like to say, I think it was really clever to call it the promise. Most of these kind of reviews and reports that come out, it's you know, it's a so and so, it's named after her as a chair of it, and the rest of it, and you know, it's here's a report and a list of recommendations. And certainly, I know right from the very beginning, for Fiona Duncan and the team at the care review, were always very clear about this was going to have to be something different. So calling the promise and having hashtag keep the promise really is going to hold us all accountable. So I think from that point of view, you know, the role of the promise is to keep us all accountable and to keep reminding us about what's important, and what's important is the children and young people who are at the heart of the care system. And what I think needs to change, there needs to change the residential care Red Cross, is that I used to think I understood what co-production was, and I've now been involved in a couple of processes. One was interaction and historical abuse a number of years ago, led by the Scottish Human Rights Commission and CELCIS, and the care review, and I took part in some of the events of the care review. And what really struck me in both of them was that, as I say, I used to think I knew what co-production was, and that was, yeah, we get all these people together, and children and young people together, and the rest of it, and then we go, when we hear the voices, then we go away and we hear the views, and then we go away and we decide what we're doing. But what's fundamental difference about both of those processes is it put the voices of the people who mattered most at the centre. And that can only happen if us as adults and as professionals in the system who are in positions of authority and responsibility are prepared to keep hold and keep ownership of our responsibility, but equally prepared to give up our control and power, and to share that control and power with children and young people, and ultimately the families as well, because it won't work otherwise. And that goes all the way through, and that's between the adults and the children and young people on an everyday basis. It's between local authorities and independent care providers like ourselves. It's within our own organisations in terms of the levels of jobs and management and responsibilities. You need to be prepared to give up a level of control of it, but not absolve yourself from your responsibilities. And I think Claymore and Craig's story, and when Laurence talked about Craig describing himself as the co-driver, demonstrates that perfectly. Craig never absolved himself from his responsibility as an adult and as a key worker for Claymore. But at every stage, he gave up a little bit more of his authority and his control and shared it a bit more with Claymore. And I think it's testament to that what started as an adult-child relationship, key worker-child relationship, has now grown and evolved into an adult friendship between Claymore and Craig, where they meet and they still keep in touch with each other, and they know each other's families and the rest of it. And I think that's what needs to change in the system. We need to, those of us who have got those positions of authority and power need to be prepared to genuinely give up our control and power, and to share that control and power with the people who are there to serve. But we can't walk away from our responsibilities of doing the right thing. So I think that's the role the promise has got to play, is to keep us to that promise.
Thank you very much, Paul. Paul, Laurence, it's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you both today, to hear more about each of you, who you are as individuals, and to hear more about your article. Paul and Laurence's article, The Other Side of the Wall, is free to read or download at the journal section of the CELCIS website. It's published today. And if you are interested in writing a story or speaking to somebody at the journal, then please do get in touch.
Sarah, I can just say thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to talk through what our thoughts were around it. And it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are other podcasts in this series as well, so if you can dip into them, please do.